It began with a single missing portrait hanging inside one of Buckingham Palace's most protected corridors. Courtiers noticed it first. Then the staff whispered. Then the silence became impossible to ignore. Queen Camilla's image, once displayed beside the senior royals during the height of the post-coronation era, had quietly vanished overnight. And according to palace insiders, the order behind that removal did not come from an ordinary aide. It came from deep inside the future court of Prince William. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, aides reportedly tried to dismiss the disappearance as a routine interior adjustment connected to preparations for an upcoming diplomatic reception inside Buckingham Palace. But that explanation collapsed almost immediately. Staff members familiar with the royal corridors allegedly noticed something deeply unusual the moment they arrived that morning. The wall where Camilla's portrait had hung for months had not been replaced with another royal image. There was only an empty space. No announcement. No ceremonial relocation. No explanation from palace communications. And within hours, according to insiders, tension spread through the palace like wildfire. Some reportedly believed the portrait had been temporarily removed for restoration. Others quietly whispered that the order had come directly from advisors connected to Prince William's future household. What transformed concern into outright panic, however, was the level of secrecy surrounding the incident. Palace aides were allegedly instructed not to discuss the matter with journalists or even among lower-ranking staff. Several insiders later described the atmosphere as cold, coordinated, and deliberate, as though everyone inside the institution understood something historic was unfolding, but no one dared say it aloud. Then came the reports involving Catherine. According to royal insiders, the Princess of Wales attended a closed-door meeting later that same afternoon with Prince William, senior archivists, and several royal historians, tasked with reviewing what insiders cryptically referred to as future image continuity. That phrase alone reportedly sent shockwaves through certain palace departments, because within royal operations, continuity was never just about portraits or hallway arrangements. It was about power, legacy, permanence. Sources close to palace administrative circles allegedly claim this was not an isolated incident at all, but part of a much wider restructuring already quietly underway behind the scenes. Some even suggest discussions regarding Camilla's long-term visibility within official royal presentation had been taking place for months while King Charles remained increasingly consumed by health concerns and constitutional pressures. The timing, according to insiders, was impossible to ignore. Charles himself was reportedly informed only after the portrait had already been removed, a detail that palace observers now describe as one of the most revealing aspects of the entire affair. Because inside the monarchy, protocol is everything. Senior image changes are rarely executed without direct consultation from the sovereign. Yet somehow this operation moved forward first, and explanations came later. That alone fueled whispers that a new center of authority was beginning to emerge behind palace walls, one operating with growing confidence and frightening precision. Meanwhile, media insiders who had spent weeks sensing unusual shifts inside royal scheduling reportedly began connecting the dots. Camilla's visibility at certain planning discussions had allegedly declined. Several internal event drafts were quietly revised. Future ceremonial concepts reportedly emphasized William and Catherine more aggressively than before, while Camilla's positioning appeared increasingly uncertain. And although no public statement confirmed any internal conflict, the silence itself became deafening. Because in royal history, the most devastating decisions are rarely announced in explosive fashion. They happen quietly. One removed portrait. One canceled appearance. One corridor left suddenly empty. And according to those closest to the palace, the disappearance of one portrait was only the surface of a much deeper operation, one tied to a hidden royal protocol that insiders now claim had been prepared for years. For decades, royal portraits were never just paintings or photographs. They were declarations of hierarchy, legitimacy, and permanence. Which is why the sudden removal of Queen Camilla from multiple royal display corridors reportedly triggered panic among the old palace guard almost immediately. Inside Buckingham Palace, portraits had always carried a meaning far deeper than decoration. They were silent announcements of who mattered, who endured, and who would ultimately define the future of the crown. Every placement was deliberate. Every hallway arrangement reflected invisible calculations about loyalty, succession, and power. That was the reality Queen Elizabeth II reportedly understood better than anyone. According to former palace insiders and royal historians, the late monarch maintained extraordinarily strict oversight over official imagery during the final years of her reign, especially after periods of instability threatened public confidence in the institution. Portrait positioning, seating arrangements, balcony appearances, none of it was accidental, which is why the abrupt disappearance of Camilla's image sent shockwaves through senior royal circles almost instantly. The old palace guard allegedly recognized the move for what it truly represented. Not a redesign, but a warning. Reports suggest several scheduled portrait updates had already been delayed for months as King Charles struggled privately with growing health pressures. Sources close to palace administrative staff claim uncertainty surrounding the king's condition created a dangerous vacuum inside certain royal operations, forcing senior advisors to quietly begin preparing for a more accelerated transition than the public fully realized. And according to insiders, that was precisely when Prince William's inner circle allegedly began pushing for what some described as a streamlined future monarchy image. The phrase itself reportedly unsettled long-serving staff because its meaning was impossible to ignore. It suggested consolidation, simplification, a narrowing of the institution around a smaller and more tightly controlled group of senior royals. Within that vision, Catherine reportedly emerged as the undeniable centerpiece of the monarchy's next chapter. Palace commentators began quietly noticing how official communications increasingly centered on William and Catherine as the emotional anchors of the royal family, particularly during periods when Charles appeared exhausted or absent from public duties. Meanwhile, Camilla's ceremonial prominence allegedly became a growing point of tension behind closed doors. Sources whisper that the Queen Consort resisted several subtle attempts to reduce her visibility within future planning discussions, especially those tied to state imagery and international representation. For Camilla, insiders claim the issue was not vanity, it was survival. After spending decades fighting public hostility and institutional resistance, she had finally secured a position beside the sovereign. To quietly lose influence now, at the very moment the monarchy itself appeared vulnerable, reportedly felt like betrayal on an almost unimaginable scale. And as those internal struggles intensified, the divide between Clarence House loyalists and Kensington Palace advisors allegedly became impossible to hide. Staff members who once operated as part of a unified royal machine reportedly began functioning like rival courts competing for control over the crown's future narrative. Meetings grew colder. Communications became increasingly formal. Even minor scheduling disputes allegedly carried an undercurrent of distrust. Some insiders now claim that behind the polite language and carefully managed appearances, a silent institutional war had already begun. At the center of it all stood Catherine, whose rising popularity reportedly convinced many palace strategists that the monarchy's long-term survival depended on reshaping public perception around her future role as queen. The contrast was stark and increasingly painful. While Catherine symbolized continuity, discipline, and renewal in the eyes of royal traditionalists, Camilla allegedly became associated with an older era of compromise and controversy the institution now wished to move beyond. Palace commentators later described the portrait removals as a form of symbolic institutional distancing, a quiet but devastating signal that the monarchy was preparing emotionally and structurally for a different future. But while the public saw only missing frames and altered gallery walls, insiders claim something far more devastating was happening behind closed doors. King Charles III was reportedly left stunned when details of the portrait removals reached him through private briefings rather than direct consultation. And according to multiple palace whispers, that moment exposed a terrifying truth inside the monarchy. Two competing royal courts were now operating under the same crown. For decades, the British monarchy survived, because even during moments of disagreement, the institution projected unity. The public was never supposed to see fractures inside the royal machine. But insiders now claim that behind the heavy silence consuming Buckingham Palace, a bitter struggle over the monarchy's future had already begun to spiral beyond containment. Reports suggest Charles attempted to calm tensions privately in the days following the removals, hoping to avoid what several aides allegedly described as a catastrophic symbolic conflict during an already fragile period for the crown. According to palace sources, the king was deeply unsettled not only by the removals themselves, but by the manner in which they were carried out. Decisions involving royal imagery, especially those tied to senior figures, traditionally passed through layers of consultation connected directly to the sovereign. Yet this operation reportedly moved ahead with astonishing confidence before Charles fully grasped the scale of what had happened. To some insiders, that was the clearest indication yet that authority inside the monarchy was quietly shifting away from the present reign and toward the next one. Clarence House allies allegedly viewed the entire affair as humiliating and unnecessary. Some reportedly believed Camilla was being deliberately isolated by advisors determined to reshape the monarchy around William and Catherine long before any formal transition of power occurred. Others whispered something even darker, that certain palace strategists feared Camilla's continued visibility complicated the carefully crafted image of a modernized future monarchy they now wanted the public to embrace. That phrase surfaced repeatedly in royal conversations during those tense weeks. Stability and clarity. According to insiders close to William's camp, those two words became the justification behind nearly every internal adjustment being proposed. Supporters of the Prince of Wales reportedly argued that after years of scandals, public distrust, family divisions, and Charles's declining health battles, the monarchy could no longer survive mixed messaging or blurred hierarchies. The institution needed discipline, simplicity, a single emotional center the public could rally behind. And increasingly, that center was Catherine. Although the Princess of Wales remained publicly silent throughout the controversy, palace commentators claim her influence behind closed doors had grown enormously. Sources suggest Catherine quietly supported efforts to streamline the monarchy's image, not out of personal ambition, but from a belief that the institution itself was entering one of the most dangerous periods in modern royal history. Those close to the future Princess Queen reportedly viewed public confidence as fragile, particularly after years of relentless family warfare involving Harry, Meghan, Andrew, and ongoing constitutional anxieties surrounding Charles's health. But for Charles himself, the emotional cost of the conflict reportedly became devastating. Royal commentators later speculated that the king feared another public fracture, similar to the darkest periods of royal instability during Queen Victoria's later reign, when competing royal households and succession anxieties quietly poisoned the institution from within. The comparisons reportedly haunted senior aides. Once again, a monarch appeared trapped between personal loyalty and institutional survival. Once again, rival factions inside the palace operated with growing distrust. And once again, the crown itself seemed caught in the middle of a struggle no one wanted the public to fully understand. Meanwhile, palace insiders claim several senior staff members quietly began shifting their loyalty toward William's future court, sensing where the monarchy's real momentum was heading. Some communications teams reportedly adjusted internal priorities. Event planners allegedly started emphasizing William and Catherine more aggressively in long-term ceremonial preparations. Even media outlets began subtly reflecting the shift. Royal watchers noticed Camilla appearing less prominently in official coverage, while William and Catherine increasingly dominated headlines tied to continuity, stability, and the monarchy's future. What made the atmosphere even more chilling was the absence of open confrontation. No dramatic arguments reached the public. No explosive statement emerged from the palace. Instead, everything unfolded through silence, omission, and careful institutional distance. And according to insiders, that silence became far more frightening than any public scandal, because it suggested the monarchy was no longer debating temporary optics. It was quietly preparing for permanent change. But the real shock came days later, when insiders claimed the removals were not temporary adjustments at all, but part of a permanent visual purge already underway. Behind the carefully controlled smiles and polished palace appearances, insiders whisper that Catherine had already become the centerpiece of a long-prepared transition strategy, one designed to reshape the monarchy's public identity before William ever takes the throne. By the time the portrait removals became impossible to hide, Many inside royal circles reportedly believed the real transformation had already been underway for years. The missing images were not the beginning of the operation. They were simply the first visible crack in a carefully managed structure the palace had fought desperately to conceal from the public. According to sources familiar with internal planning discussions, senior royal advisors increasingly viewed Catherine not merely as the future queen, but as the emotional survival mechanism of the monarchy itself. Her popularity, her restraint, and her ability to project calm during periods of crisis allegedly made her the central figure in long-term institutional strategy meetings. And as King Charles struggled with mounting physical exhaustion and relentless constitutional pressures, that strategy reportedly accelerated behind closed doors. Palace insiders claim advisors became deeply concerned about lingering public divisions connected to Camilla's complicated legacy within the royal family. While the Queen Consort had spent years rebuilding public acceptance after decades of controversy, some strategists allegedly feared that future instability surrounding the crown could reopen old wounds the institution could no longer afford to revisit. In private discussions, according to several royal commentators, there was growing belief that the monarchy needed a cleaner emotional narrative moving forward, one centered on William and Catherine as symbols of continuity, discipline, and renewal. That fear reportedly shaped everything from public scheduling to state event planning. Sources now claim the portrait updates were tied directly to future branding strategies already being quietly developed for major ceremonial events expected over the coming years. Certain palace planners allegedly wanted official imagery to emphasize a seamless generational transition long before William formally ascended the throne. The goal, according to insiders, was psychological as much as political. They wanted the public emotionally prepared for a monarchy increasingly defined by Catherine's presence and William's authority, while reducing dependence on figures connected to older royal controversies. At the heart of those discussions, insiders whisper, emerged something known internally as the heirs' accord. Though never publicly acknowledged, the alleged understanding reportedly united William, Princess Anne, and several powerful senior administrators who believed the institution required stricter discipline to survive the next decade. Princess Anne's role in particular became the subject of intense speculation within palace corridors. Long respected as one of the monarchy's most uncompromising guardians of protocol, Anne reportedly supported efforts to create a more rigid institutional hierarchy surrounding future royal representation. To her allies, this was not cruelty or personal hostility toward Camilla. It was preservation. Duty above sentiment. The crown above individual relationships. Those close to the process allegedly argued that the monarchy had already endured too many years of emotional chaos, public feuds, memoir scandals, and collapsing public trust. They believed a streamlined structure centered firmly around William and Catherine offered the institution its best chance at long-term survival. And increasingly, comparisons between Catherine and Queen Elizabeth II reportedly began surfacing inside palace conversations with remarkable frequency. Royal commentators noted how both women projected a similar discipline, an ability to absorb pressure without public collapse, to remain emotionally controlled while the institution around them trembled. For many traditionalists inside the monarchy, Catherine allegedly represented something they feared had nearly disappeared from royal life: stability without spectacle. But while William's supporters viewed the transition strategy as necessary modernization, Camilla's allies reportedly saw something far darker unfolding behind the scenes. Several insiders claim members of the Queen Consort's circle accused Kensington Palace advisors of deliberately sidelining her through coordinated institutional pressure rather than direct confrontation. Instead of public humiliation, they alleged, the future court relied on quieter methods: reduced visibility, altered placements, diminished prominence, carefully managed optics. The emotional damage of that strategy reportedly spread rapidly through palace morale. Staff members became increasingly divided during internal meetings, with some privately aligning themselves with the future reign, while others remained fiercely loyal to Charles and Camilla. According to insiders, the atmosphere grew so tense that ordinary administrative discussions sometimes carried the weight of political negotiations between rival governments. Yet despite the growing unease, no one publicly challenged the operation. Because deep inside Buckingham Palace, many already sensed the balance of power had shifted beyond reversal. But even as the future court tightened its control over royal imagery, a hidden archive inside Buckingham Palace threatened to expose how long this plan had truly existed. According to royal insiders, the most explosive discovery was not the missing portraits themselves, but a sealed administrative directive allegedly connected to Queen Elizabeth II's final institutional planning before her death. By the time whispers of the hidden document began circulating through Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere inside the monarchy had reportedly shifted from tension to outright fear. Because if the rumors were true, then the portrait removals were not a sudden decision made during King Charles's reign at all. They were part of a strategy that may have been quietly designed years earlier under the authority of the late Queen herself. Sources close to palace archival operations claim a group of royal archivists had recently been tasked with reviewing historical portrait placement protocols dating back decades, including procedures connected to succession transitions, state mourning periods, and long-term continuity planning. At first, several staff members allegedly assumed the review was routine, especially given the king's ongoing health difficulties and the monarchy's increasing concern about public stability. But according to insiders, the mood changed instantly when references surfaced to a classified institutional framework tied to what palace officials reportedly described as future continuity preservation. That phrase alone reportedly sent chills through certain senior administrators, because within royal operations, continuity was sacred. It was not about emotion. It was not about personal loyalty. It was about survival. And insiders now whisper that Queen Elizabeth II understood that principle with ruthless clarity during the final years of her reign. Royal commentators have long argued that the late Queen spent her final decade quietly preparing the institution for a period of unprecedented instability. Brexit turmoil, family fractures, public distrust, Harry and Meghan's departure, Prince Andrew's collapse, Charles's uncertain public standing. According to some historians familiar with palace culture, Elizabeth allegedly became increasingly obsessed with protecting the monarchy from emotional volatility after witnessing how quickly public confidence could erode during moments of royal scandal, which is why reports of a sealed directive tied to image continuity immediately sparked panic behind palace walls. Sources claim the document outlined internal recommendations connected to visual hierarchy, ceremonial representation, and long-term public positioning during future reign transitions. Insiders whisper that Queen Elizabeth prioritized institutional stability above all else, even when it came at enormous personal cost. To her, according to palace veterans, the monarchy could survive discomfort, resentment, even betrayal, but it could never survive confusion. And that philosophy allegedly became the foundation for a quiet internal doctrine, now referred to by some royal staff as the continuity order. Though never publicly acknowledged, the doctrine reportedly emphasized consistency of royal symbolism during periods of uncertainty, ensuring the public always understood where authority, stability, and succession truly resided. Palace historians allegedly argued that visual consistency mattered far more than most outsiders realized. Portraits, balcony formations, ceremonial placements, official photography, these things were not cosmetic. They were psychological anchors connecting the monarchy to national confidence. Several insiders now claim the recent removals and rearrangements were justified internally through that very argument. If the crown was entering a dangerous transition era, then every public symbol had to reinforce unity around the institution's future center of gravity. Increasingly, that center was William and Catherine. But while palace strategists viewed the process as necessary protection for the monarchy, the emotional consequences reportedly devastated King Charles. Sources close to the palace claim the king struggled deeply with the institutional implications of the operation, especially if elements of it truly traced back to understandings formed during Queen Elizabeth's final years. Charles had spent much of his life balancing personal loyalty against duty to the crown. Now, insiders whisper, he found himself trapped in the cruelest version of that conflict imaginable. Protecting the institution increasingly seemed to require the quiet diminishing of the woman who had stood beside him through decades of scandal, humiliation, and public hostility. Meanwhile, Camilla's allies reportedly felt more isolated with each passing week. Several insiders claim even long-serving palace staff began avoiding association with her faction as fears grew that William's future court was consolidating authority faster than expected. Royal commentators later described the atmosphere as one of controlled institutional freezing, where every silence carried meaning and every absence felt intentional. More chilling still was the growing belief that the monarchy had entered its most carefully managed transition period in generations. Nothing appeared accidental anymore. Every appearance, every portrait, every positioning decision allegedly formed part of a larger strategy unfolding in slow motion behind palace walls. But the final stage of the operation would reportedly push tensions beyond private corridors and directly into public view. Then came the balcony appearance that royal watchers would later call impossible to ignore. One position changed, one familiar figure missing, and suddenly the whispers surrounding the portrait removals no longer looked like rumors at all. For weeks, palace officials had reportedly insisted that the growing speculation surrounding Camilla's reduced visibility was nothing more than overanalysis from tabloids desperate for scandal. But according to royal commentators, the atmosphere changed instantly the moment the royal family stepped forward during that highly scrutinized public appearance. People noticed the spacing first, then the positioning, then the uncomfortable realization that the visual structure unfolding before the cameras mirrored the same quiet distancing already happening inside palace corridors and official portrait galleries. To casual observers, the adjustments may have appeared minor, but to those who spent years studying royal protocol, symbolism, and ceremonial hierarchy, the message reportedly felt unmistakable. Public appearances had begun reflecting the same carefully controlled reduction of visibility that insiders claimed was already transforming palace operations behind the scenes. Royal analysts quickly pointed to what they described as deliberate positioning changes during multiple ceremonies in the weeks that followed. Catherine and William increasingly occupied the emotional and symbolic center of royal appearances, often framed not simply as senior royals, but as the undeniable future of the monarchy itself. Their prominence reportedly intensified with every engagement, every state function, every carefully choreographed public interaction. And as their visibility rose, Camilla's appeared to narrow with startling speed. Sources close to palace planning teams allege the queen consort was quietly excluded from several consultations tied to upcoming state event preparations and future ceremonial concepts. Though no formal demotion ever occurred, insiders claim the practical reality inside palace operations began shifting dramatically. Decisions increasingly flowed through advisors connected to William's future household, while certain Clarence House figures reportedly found themselves bypassed altogether during strategic planning discussions. Royal commentators later described the process as a transition of symbolic authority, one unfolding not through constitutional declarations, but through optics, positioning, and relentless institutional discipline. What made the situation even more unsettling was how carefully controlled everything appeared. Palace staff were allegedly instructed to maintain absolute message discipline during the growing media frenzy. No leaks, no reactions, no acknowledgement of internal tensions. According to insiders, even lower-level aides became terrified of speaking openly, as rumors spread that senior administrators were monitoring every conversation tied to the controversy. Yet despite the silence, the public continued noticing changes impossible to fully explain away. Certain official photographs reportedly emphasized William and Catherine almost exclusively. Some event summaries minimized references to Camilla altogether. Royal correspondents began quietly discussing whether the monarchy was already preparing emotionally for a future era before the current reign had truly stabilized. At the center of the storm stood King Charles, increasingly caught between the institution he had spent his life waiting to lead and the painful realization that its survival strategy might now be moving beyond his control. During several appearances, commentators observed what they described as visible strain in the king's demeanor. He smiled. He fulfilled his role. He projected unity whenever cameras appeared. But according to palace insiders, the emotional pressure behind closed doors had become enormous. Charles reportedly continued attempting to calm divisions privately, hoping to prevent another catastrophic fracture inside the House of Windsor. Yet with every carefully managed appearance, the divide seemed to deepen rather than disappear. For Camilla, the emotional consequences allegedly became impossible to ignore. Allies close to her circle reportedly viewed the public repositioning as deeply humiliating, especially after years spent helping Charles stabilize his reign following decades of controversy. Some insiders whispered that the Queen Consort now felt trapped inside a palace environment growing colder by the day, surrounded by advisors and officials increasingly focused on the next reign rather than the current one. Meanwhile, public speculation exploded across British tabloids and international media. Every altered seating arrangement, every delayed appearance, every missing photograph became fuel for theories about a silent institutional purge unfolding behind palace walls. And because the monarchy refused to publicly address the rumors directly, the mystery only grew darker. The silence itself became evidence in the eyes of many observers. Something enormous was happening inside Buckingham Palace. Something carefully controlled. Something irreversible. But behind the controlled smiles and ceremonial appearances, insiders claimed the emotional fallout inside the palace had already become irreversible. For Queen Camilla, insiders claimed the removals represented more than a public embarrassment. They symbolized the slow collapse of the influence she had spent decades fighting to secure inside the House of Windsor. Few figures in modern royal history endured a longer, harsher climb toward acceptance than Camilla. For years, she existed at the center of controversy, blamed by critics, distrusted by parts of the public, and viewed by many traditionalists as an outsider trying to force her way into the sacred structure of the monarchy. Yet despite the hostility, she survived. She adapted. She stood beside Charles through scandal, public fury, family fractures, and relentless media pressure, until eventually she reached the one position many once believed impossible: queen beside the sovereign himself. That long struggle reportedly made the recent changes inside Buckingham Palace feel not merely political but deeply personal. According to palace insiders, Camilla increasingly sensed that the institution she had spent decades helping stabilize was now quietly preparing to move beyond her. Reports suggest she felt progressively isolated from key decision-making discussions, especially those tied to future planning and ceremonial restructuring. Meetings she once would have attended reportedly proceeded without her involvement. Internal briefings allegedly became more selective. Even long-serving Clarence House figures supposedly noticed how rapidly influence inside the palace was shifting toward advisors connected to William and Catherine. For Camilla's loyalists, the emotional impact was devastating. Some insiders claim frustration inside Clarence House grew intense as supporters watched their influence shrink in real time, while Kensington Palace's authority expanded almost unchecked. Comparisons quickly emerged to earlier royal succession struggles throughout British history, particularly periods when aging reigns slowly lost control to rising future courts before any formal transfer of power had actually occurred. Palace historians quietly reference the dangerous rivalries that consumed the monarchy during the later years of Queen Victoria's reign, and even the bitter factionalism surrounding Edward VIII's collapse decades later. The fear among some insiders was not simply division, it was emotional fragmentation within the institution itself. Sources close to the palace claim Charles attempted several private reconciliations during this period, hoping to ease the growing tensions before they hardened into permanent resentment. According to whispers from royal staff, the king remained deeply torn between his loyalty to Camilla and his growing awareness that William's advisors believed the monarchy required a stricter, more controlled future image to survive. Charles reportedly understood the arguments being made around public trust, continuity, and institutional discipline, but understanding them did not lessen the emotional pain. Because behind the strategy discussions and symbolic adjustments stood a brutal reality. The woman who had stood beside him through the darkest years of his public life now allegedly felt herself becoming increasingly peripheral inside the very institution she had sacrificed so much to enter. Meanwhile, William reportedly remained focused almost entirely on protecting the monarchy's long-term image. According to insiders, the Prince of Wales viewed emotional discomfort as secondary to institutional survival. After years of scandals involving Harry, Meghan, Andrew, and growing Republican sentiment among younger generations, sources claim William became convinced the crown could no longer afford instability, ambiguity, or competing centers of emotional authority. Within that vision, Catherine reportedly emerged as the embodiment of continuity the palace desperately needed. Calm under pressure, disciplined in public, careful with tradition. Royal commentators increasingly compared her presence to the stabilizing effect Queen Elizabeth II once projected during moments of national uncertainty. And as Catherine's symbolic importance rose, Camilla's position allegedly weakened further. Palace insiders later described the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace during this period as one of icy professionalism. Conversations reportedly remained polite, schedules continued moving, ceremonies unfolded without visible disruption. But emotionally, something fundamental had broken beneath the surface. Staff members allegedly chose sides quietly. Alliances hardened. Trust diminished. According to royal commentators, the divide between the current reign and the future court may have permanently reshaped the monarchy's internal dynamics in ways the public still does not fully understand. What made the situation especially tragic was the absence of open warfare. There were no dramatic confrontations, no explosive public accusations, no constitutional crises visible to the outside world. Instead, everything unfolded through silence, distance, omission, and carefully controlled symbolism. And perhaps that made it even colder. Because inside royal history, the most devastating endings rarely arrive through sudden collapse. They arrive through slow disappearance. One meeting missed. One portrait removed. One position quietly changed until eventually an entire era realizes it no longer stands at the center of the crown. But as the monarchy moved forward into a colder and more disciplined future, one final realization began spreading through palace corridors. In the end, the disappearance of Queen Camilla from royal portraits was never just about photographs, gallery walls, or palace aesthetics. It was about the future of the crown itself, and who would ultimately control the image of the monarchy for generations to come. By the time the final adjustments inside Buckingham Palace became impossible to ignore, many royal observers had already reached the same chilling conclusion. The monarchy was quietly entering a new era, long before the public was formally told it had begun. The portraits had changed. The ceremonial positions had shifted. The emotional center of the institution had slowly moved. And standing at the heart of that transformation were William and Catherine, increasingly presented not simply as the next generation of royals, but as the carefully protected future of the crown itself. According to palace insiders, every strategic decision now revolved around stability, continuity, and public trust. The monarchy had endured years of chaos, family betrayals, damaging interviews, constitutional anxiety, declining confidence, and relentless media warfare. Inside that pressure, royal strategists allegedly became convinced that the institution could only survive through discipline and absolute message control. William reportedly embraced that responsibility with growing intensity, understanding that the future throne would inherit not only centuries of tradition, but the emotional exhaustion of an institution fighting to preserve its relevance in a changing world. Beside him stood Catherine, whose calm public image reportedly became the foundation upon which the palace hoped to rebuild long-term confidence. To supporters inside the royal household, she represented the return of quiet dignity after years of turbulence. To critics, however, her rise symbolized something colder, a carefully managed transition that left little room for competing figures within the royal hierarchy. Behind the scenes, insiders claim Princess Anne continued enforcing strict continuity measures with relentless precision. Long viewed as one of the monarchy's most disciplined defenders, Anne allegedly believed the institution could not afford emotional hesitation during periods of instability. Sources whisper that she viewed symbolism itself as a weapon capable of protecting or weakening the crown depending on how carefully it was controlled. Portraits. Appearances. Placements. Visibility. Nothing, according to palace insiders, was accidental anymore. Every adjustment allegedly formed part of a larger strategy aimed at reinforcing a singular public understanding of where the monarchy's future truly resided. And trapped in the center of that transformation stood King Charles III. Royal commentators increasingly portrayed him as a monarch divided between love and duty, between personal loyalty and institutional survival. Those close to palace operations claim Charles understood the emotional cost of what was unfolding around him, yet felt powerless to fully stop it without risking even deeper fractures inside the monarchy itself. In many ways, insiders whisper, the king became the tragic figure of the entire transition. A man who waited his whole life to wear the crown, only to discover that preserving it might require sacrifices far more painful than he ever imagined. For Camilla, the consequences reportedly arrived not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet reduction. Her role was never publicly stripped away. No official declaration announced her diminishing influence. Instead, the changes unfolded through subtle institutional mechanisms that became more visible with every passing month. Fewer appearances, less strategic involvement, reduced symbolic prominence. Royal historians later described the entire process as a controlled transition of legacy, one designed to avoid public instability while gradually consolidating the monarchy around its future leadership structure. Yet despite the palace's efforts to maintain calm, speculation never truly disappeared. British tabloids, royal commentators, and international media outlets continued dissecting every altered detail, searching for clues about what further changes might still be coming. Some insiders even claim the restructuring extended far beyond portraits and ceremonial optics, touching deeper questions about future royal authority, internal hierarchy, and the long-term emotional identity of the monarchy itself. What made the entire saga so haunting was not the presence of open conflict, but the silence surrounding it. No dramatic battles played out publicly. No official war erupted between royal households. Instead, an entire shift in power unfolded through absence, restraint, and controlled symbolism. And perhaps that was the most revealing lesson of all. Because inside the House of Windsor, survival has never belonged to the loudest figure in the room. It belongs to the institution willing to outlast emotion itself. And inside the silent corridors of Buckingham Palace, where portraits once defined power and permanence, one lesson now echoes louder than ever before. In the House of Windsor, legacy is never inherited peacefully. It is protected, defended, and sometimes quietly erased. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.